You are listening to Nerd Best Friends, a podcast that covers the nerdy conversations you're already having, or wish you could. It's the nerdiest thing you'll do this week.
Welcome back to Nerd Best Friends. I am Analese, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
It's a bird, it's a plane. Nope, it's me, Rob, your best friend and your podcast host. How's it going, Analese?
Super. The Nerd Best Friends podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Subscribe and follow us today. It is season 2, episode 23. This episode is all about the Man of Steel, Superman. But first, Rob's recommendations.
All right, this episode's recommendation was actually recommended to me by a listener of the podcast who thought that this would be something that I would enjoy, and they were right. This is a comic book series. I've been reading it in the collections and the trades. It is called Once and Future by Kieran and Gillen, Dan Mora, and Tamara Bonvillain, published by Boom Studios. Again, Once and Future. It is kind of tropey, kind of silly. It's this nerdy guy, and he starts seeing things around his life, kind of like a fantasy movie, usually starts like, hey, I think I saw a guy with a sword at the mall or something like that. And he's kind of getting wrapped up in this adventure. Come to find out, his grandmother, who raised him, is this lore keeper, monster hunter type character that for decades has been protecting the thin veil between our world and the Arthurian legends and that reality of the King Arthur myth and those kinds of things. Things I like about this book: one, it does not dumb down that Arthurian legend or myth at all. It comes from a place of assuming you know everything you need to know about that. So there's not a lot of exposition about who these characters are, even though some of them are pretty obscure if you're not up on that. But what it does is it makes you want to learn more about those things, right? So if I see Sir Gawain show up and I'm like, I recognize that name, but I'm not really sure what it was that he did. He's going to have his thing that he does in the comic book. It's going to be cool. And maybe I'm going to say, like, you know what? I'm just going to Wikipedia Sir Gawain and see what his deal was. Then doing that then I go back like, oh, that makes sense of why they did this in the comic book. Rather than making it superficial so that it's really obvious to everybody, or rather than taking time when it's not obvious, well-known characters to bog the story down with exposition, they just go with it. And it's up to you whether you want to fill those gaps in or not. The second thing I love about this book is the grandma in this story is an awesome character, and that is something different than I'm seeing in a lot of the media that I read or the things that I'm watching. This is like hardcore, badass, tight grandma who is just slinging weapons, and she's got the plan and she's driving it head first. It's absolutely incredible. It's very inspiring. Like the next Dungeons and Dragons or RPG character I want to play is going to be like hardcore grandma, because I'm just
Yes.
absolutely loving it.
We have some nerd mail, Rob.
The first is in regards to whatever episode it was where you were talking about your experience at that pinball tournament that you participated in. Nancy let us know that, in fact, all pinball machines are capable of multiplayer like you were describing. So it turns out if you put in enough money, if the play is $1 and you put in 8 quarters, but then hit that start button twice, it will set to a 2-player game back and forth. I never knew that.
It's definitely pretty cool to know that that can happen. Like we can just go, where is it here that has Institution downtown? Institution
Yes.
Brewery has those pinball machines. We could play multiplayer games there without it having a special setup. So that was really cool to learn as well. I didn't know the answer.
Go back there and see what they've got, because I was really excited when they had the Star Wars pinball machine. Then they replaced the Star Wars pinball machine with the Walking Dead pinball machine, and I was less excited about that one because, of course, it was from the show, not from the comic book, and I'm a snob. So maybe they've changed it out again.
And maybe they have more. You said they changed that back area where it is too, so we should probably go back and check it out.
Worst thing that can happen, we end up with a pretzel and a beer.
I mean, We also got mail from a new listener who was catching up on last season, particularly our episodes Nerd Watching the 80s, which we did in season 1, and wanted to throw out a recommendation based off of the movies. And actually, this is a category that we didn't explore in any of our Nerd Watching, made-for-TV movies. When television studios would capitalize on the popularity of TV stars like Michael J. Fox and Natalie McKeon. These were two 1980s television stars who had not yet reached into movie making, and got them to do a longer feature film made for TV. And then Michael J. Fox goes off and does Back to the Future and all those things. The movie is called Poison Ivy. And the tagline to the movie is, "If parents really knew what went on at summer camp."
Poison Ivy is a 1992 American erotic thriller.
No. Poison Ivy has
starring Drew Barrymore.
The title Poison Ivy, that actually is a very horrible horror movie from the 90s that I did not talk about in our 90s episode either. Poison Ivy's been used for a bunch of names. There's also a comic book. Isn't there a superhero or villain, Poison Ivy, as well?
Poison Ivy is in the Batman Rogues Gallery.
You have to look for the 1985 IMDb Poison Ivy made for television movie. Natalie McKeon played Joe in The Facts of Life, and Michael J. Fox.
No way!
Yeah, Michael J. Fox. So they're romantic interest as camp counselors and stuff like that. And it's just one of those really campy, horrible made-for-TV movies that...
Oh my God, look at Michael J. Fox right there on the cover.
Very indicative of the 80s. You remember those, like, on a very special after-school special, Don't Take Candy from Strangers. That was very popular in the 80s. It's not very popular now because everything is streaming. So people bridge that gap between television series and movies a lot more easily.
Haven't those kind of movies migrated from, like the after school special or the, on a very special movie night of a main network? Aren't those kind of films now on Lifetime and the Hallmark Channel? Is that where that genre still lives?
Yes, and they took particular segments of that genre, right? If we call it a genre, the made-for-TV movie. This one doesn't fit into those because Hallmark is the like, two divorcees move back home and rekindle their Christmas love. And that's very...
It can't
Hallmark
be Christmas
is very,
all year long, right? Or is it Christmas all year long?
You would be surprised if you looked at the Hallmark Channel. So they took a very, like, maybe the romance, maybe the Nicholas Sparks rekindled love from my past type, not quite romance version of the made-for-TV movie. This is campy. It is intended for a very particular younger audience who recognize the TV stars, puts them in something that's not their character. There was another one in the early 90s that I remember watching with my siblings. We recorded it on VHS off of the television. It was called Camp Cucamonga. I don't even know if you can find it on IMDb, but it was all of those stars. It was Winnie and the nerdy dude from the Wonder Years, and it was what's her face, the oldest sister in Full House, and it was Urkel, and it was a couple other really famous people, and they were all at this camp. And it's basically Poison Ivy reimagined, and here's a bunch of TV stars who are aging out of their child roles, trying to bridge the gap into movies, and obviously none of them did. But that's what this movie is, Poison Ivy, made for TV. You probably can't find it anywhere unless you go find the bargain bins in your local Goodwill or thrift type stores for the VHS. Maybe you can find it on eBay. Is it worth finding on eBay? I don't know. But thanks to that listener for bringing that up and made me think about that made for TV movie isn't a thing anymore.
No, definitely not. Those actors and those stars now have so many different options, right? They don't need extra promotion by working more. They can do that work on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, and do all of that promotion themselves. Interesting.
And it's also
another thing the social media killed.
Yeah, no. Well, also streaming. Because realistically, those made-for-TV movies are now 3-4 part series on Netflix or Hulu, or even YouTube is producing stuff now. The equivalent of this type of movie pops up in those, and then with Netflix, they pay them so cheaply for the first series, and then if it takes off, they'll make more out of it.
You ready to talk about Superman?
Let's talk about Superman.
Let's talk about a Superman.
So similar to our Batman episode last season, we decided to focus on Superman this season and just kind of talk about some overarching categories You know what I realized when setting up for this episode? I don't think I've seen a complete Superman movie. Any of them, ever.
Meaning complete like the story is complete, or complete like you've never been able to sit through an entire movie?
I've never bothered to sit through an entire movie. I've seen bits and pieces of the Christopher Reeves ones. I have not seen any of the newer ones with The Witcher. What's his name?
Oh, Henry Cavill.
Thank you. I have not seen any of them. I've seen clips, bits and pieces of the Justice League that came out with him playing Superman and the other DC heroes. I haven't seen much.
Definitely seen all of the old Christopher Reeves ones multiple times. And then when it was kind of rebooted, and I think it was Brandon Routh was Superman in that Man of Steel movie, I went to go see that. And I was pretty disappointed in that movie. I did not feel like it was a Superman movie at all. I felt like it was kind of a disaster movie, but the disaster was Superman.
Oh, man.
So I wasn't very impressed by that. And that kind of launched their, hey, we want to do what Marvel does, but worse kind of movie thing. And you're right. I just haven't bothered with that.
It's almost safe to say, I think you might agree with this, that television has actually done a better job with the Superman story than the movies have. Outside of the Christopher Reeves movies, we'll talk about a little bit later, but they are the pinnacle, I think, of telling the Superman story in a movie. But the series like Smallville, and there's Lois and Clark, and there's Superman and Lois, which is the newer series that came out a bunch of years ago. Those, in my opinion, tell the story of Superman better than the movies have.
I would add to that and say, I agree with you that TV is where it's at. And a Superman animated series from late 90s, early 2000s, I'd have to check the year on that led into Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. That trumps them all. That is, to me, where the best and most authentic Superman stories are being told.
You talked about that one in our Nerd Watching the
I'm
90s
sure
episodes, right? Yeah, I remember you talking about that. All right, so what we did was put some categories together, and we're going to talk about these categories. The first one, best origin story. What do you have for best origin story, Rob?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm going to say the best Superman origin story, or the quote unquote real Superman origin story, is the Bible.
What?
Siegel and Schuster, the creators of Superman, were New York City Jews, and they used the story of Moses and just updated it into a cool science fiction story to bring a character that they were familiar with and that was important to them into the mainstream. Moses was born in a doomed civilization that was being torn apart. His mother put him in a little wicker basket and sent him down the river with nothing but a hope and a prayer, where he was adopted and then raised into power as one of the sons of the pharaohs. Superman, same thing, was born onto a doomed planet that was exploding. His mother and father put him in a little wicker space capsule and sent him off into space, where he crash landed on Earth, was taken in, and as he grew, became more and more powerful and influential. The origin story is the same, and that's where it came from.
Well, I'll add to that, because I put the original comics on my list as well, that they also based off of, they were reading pulp magazines and science fiction based pulp magazines and loved the idea of an alien, fish out of water, alien on Earth story. What I thought was very interesting about those original comics, as I looked them up in pieces that I could find, is that Jonathan and Martha Kent actually don't adopt him in the original origin story at first. They find him and take him to an orphanage. And then, they have a little bit of guilt about it. They talk about it and go back to the orphanage and say, we'd like to adopt him. The rest of the origin story continues the same. I think that's interesting, because you don't really see that in any other series, movies, or comic book, that they don't actually pick him up and take him and drop him off at an orphanage.
So the 1930s story is actually more realistic than the modern tales, because if you find an abandoned child, yes, you take them to the fire department or the orphanage or whatever. You don't just be like, well, finders keepers, this is our kid now.
Baby is ours now. Yeah, exactly. And I think absent is also the woe is us story of, we can't have children of our own, so this was fate and destiny to bring us a child. That piece isn't there. That's a much more modern, late 1900s take, 1980s take of justifying the Kents keeping this random child that appears.
While we're talking about those original comics, I do want to just throw in a mention here. In 2018, DC published Action Comics 1000, and this was a huge anniversary. They pulled out all the stops. It's a big, thick comic book with a bunch of different writers and some original artists, people that were the oldest people that could still draw and stuff, do this anthology series in Action Comics 1000. This was also a big promotional stunt for ushering in Brian Michael Bendis, who at that time had moved from Marvel over to DC, and they were very excited. And oh my gosh, we've got Brian Michael Bendis. He's the biggest thing in comic book writings. We're putting him on Superman. It's going to be amazing. But one of the anthologies in that book is a reprint of Action Comics #1, which is like that first Superman story. You've probably seen it a bunch of times, where the cover is him like he's holding up that that green car in
iconic
that iconic picture that is in there, but it's not a direct reprint. It's the story. It's that story retold. It's very interesting. It takes it to another level of depth that the original one from 1938 or whatever it was, and kind of gives the villain 2 dimensions and kind of does this whole thing. But it's fantastic. That whole book is a great one to pick up if you're like, oh, what do I need for my Superman collection? Action Comics 1000 would be a great one to just like have on your shelf.
I wonder, having not read Action Comics 1000, what I appreciated about looking at some of the original Superman, like strips of it that you can find, Siegel and Schuster really double down on the science fiction part of it, right? We have Superman now. He's a little bit known to children, to us. We accept the fact that he's got superpowers. When they go through and explain the superpowers in the original comics, so they really harp on the science fiction. Well, the gravitational pull is different on Earth than it must have been on Krypton. So he's lighter. He seems stronger than the average man because the pull is different, and explaining his ability to fly and all that science fiction stuff.
Absolutely. On Krypton orbits a red sun, like a red dwarf star.
Right.
And we orbit a yellow sun, and the yellow sun's radiations are what makes him seem so powerful and invulnerable and those kinds of things. And that is carried through forever and been used by good writers to solve a lot of problems and really up the stakes for some things, as far as like, it set writers up for success as far as, well, how do we make Superman vulnerable? We need to put him in some danger. Oh, well, if he goes to this other planet and he's far away from our yellow sun, he's a regular dude again, kind of thing.
And that's also indicative of certain segments of the overarching Superman family of things when they introduce different colors of kryptonite. Oh, we found this green kryptonite. We found this red kryptonite. And they have different effects on Superman, because you can't just make this invulnerable person who can't die, apparently, and in order to create some trauma and impact on Superman, you've got to create some way. And that was also a very science fiction-y way to make that happen.
Yes, over the years of Silver Age storytelling, there is a kryptonite for every color of the rainbow and in between, and they all make Superman act in some goofy way.
How about the most complete Superman?
Yeah, so you were talking about complete, like watching a complete movie, but I think we mean here as the complete story. Like if you really want to get a sense of Superman from beginning to end, all the big beats, there is nothing that I could recommend higher than All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. This is available everywhere, your bookstores, your comic book store, online. All-Star Superman, nice, big, thick, chonky boy. It is a complete story, and it hits all of the familiar tropes and trappings of Superman in an absolutely excellent, over-the-top, loving way by these two authors. You get his relationship with Lois, you get his friendship with Jimmy Olsen, you get the death of his father by the heart attack when he can't save him, you get Lex Luthor just operating this criminal empire from inside prison, you get Clark Kent moments of balancing what it is to be human versus what it is to be super, and how much control and power he should take. You get a little bit of a stint to another planet where he's out punching meteors and fighting giant monsters that are just as strong as him. You get a little arc where Lois Lane gets powers, right? Because if you hang out with a superhero long enough, you are bound to get powers yourself. That's a rule of comics.
Yeah,
and
incidentally or on purpose, yes.
Right? You get Fortress of Solitude stuff, and it is all just lovingly crafted crafted by these two authors. I think if you're going to pick up one Superman book, All-Star Superman is the way to go.
I put down the Christopher Reeves movies, and the reason why I put that down as most complete is I think what Christopher Reeves did for Superman was give us the perfect balance of who Superman's intended to be. He's very much a human type person, even with alien origins and alien powers. Christopher Reeves gave us the insecurity of Clark Kent and what could very well have been a Captain America. I'm the perfect American, taking Superman's purity and intention of being a good person and doing good in the world and allowing that power to mix with the struggle of the secret identity and the struggle of Clark Kent and Superman existing in the same plane. The way that the stories were told in the movies he was in and the way he brought Superman to life as a person has really shaped everything that came after him. So for me, watching pieces, I've not seen one from front to end, but I've seen enough of them to know anything that we talk about post those movies is really anchored on the good job he did and the good job those movies did in taking what was in the comic books and making it come to life on the screen.
I think that's a great take as far as what Christopher did was he played both characters as very human.
Yes.
Both characters, Superman and Clark Kent, are outsiders. When he is Superman, he's trying to fit in with a planet and find his place where he is different than everyone else. And when he's Clark Kent and he's in Metropolis, he's the country boy in the city, kind of not knowing where his place is and what he needs to do. And Christopher Reeve does a great job of that. Of course, when he's Clark Kent, he's shy and his shoulders are hunched and he darts his eyes away from Lois Lane when they're talking because he's a little awkward. But even when he's Superman as well, and he's put on this persona of confidence, when someone says something to him or pays him a compliment in a way, talks about his powers, he still kind of has that Christopher Reeve wry smile and drops his chin a little bit.
Right.
Because in both areas, he's still trying to fit in and be accepted.
Yes, absolutely. And it just helped us have an understanding of the secret identity struggle and the does Superman really belong struggle. I think all of that was painted very well in the storytelling and in the way it was played by Christopher Reeves. But that leads me to an even bigger question, because I know I talk about Lois and Clark a lot, and this is something Lois and Clark did not do well. So I'm interested in what you think the best villain in the Superman world is.
The best villain in the Superman universe is Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is the arch nemesis. That's the Joker to the Batman. That's the Green Goblin to Spider-Man. It is Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor has been portrayed in a number of different ways, right? It was Gene Hackman in the movies, which is not my favorite Lex Luthor. There was Michael Rosenbaum in the Smallville series, I think was absolutely fantastic as a young Lex Luthor and just tons of motivation.
Am I right in remembering, because I've only seen bits and pieces of Smallville, that Lex Luthor plays a childhood or high school friend or buddy or acquaintance to Clark Kent in Smallville?
A real frenemy situation. And
Okay.
That's what's perfect about it is when he's with Clark Kent, he acts like a friend. But when he's not with Clark Kent, he's secretly trying to find out what Clark's secret is. And he's also involved in all of these like shady, criminal business deals behind the scene. But he's very two-faced in that way, which I think is that key to Lex Luthor.
That's not part of the origin story. Smallville kind of created that situation by having him know him as a teenager, right?
Correct.
Okay, what else you got about Lex Luthor?
That same duality, I think, happens in the comic books and in like the animated series, which really leans heavily on those comic book stories. Like there was a time in comic book history where Lex Luthor was president, and that was just this far-reaching story that spanned all of the comics in the DC universe. Was, living in a world where the supervillain is so charismatic and is so wealthy and influential that he could rise to the top of the power that was humanly possible. And that's always one of Lex Luthor's motivations, is he hates Superman because Superman was just born with all the power and influence and everybody loves him, and it's not fair. And Lex Luthor does everything he can, whether it be by hook or by crook, by influence, by crime, by making deals, by sacrificing, so that he can just continually struggle for this power. And even when he gets as powerful as a human being can be, Superman still beats him, and that, he's building kryptonite powered exosuits, and he's whatever it might be, power, property, and prestige. Lex Luthor has it to the max, but it's never good enough because of the existence of Superman. And that story and that character for Lex Luthor is the absolute best. And then sometimes Lex Luthor steals 40 cakes, and that's terrible.
I think this is where Lois and Clark missed the mark, because Lex Luthor's portrayed all of those things, but he comes off as manic obsessive about Superman and rich and powerful. And you get the Two-Face because in Lois and Clark, he actually gets engaged to Lois and then tries to kidnap her and a bunch of Lex Luthor-y type things. But it comes off as obsessive compulsive more than it is genuine. So I think that's a place where that TV series missed the mark. I chose Intergang, and Intergang is present in just about every Superman story there is, because that's what a great way to just have a continuous villain present is organized crime in Metropolis. Sometimes led by Lex Luthor. There are definitely some series where it is revealed he is lead of Intergang. Sometimes he's involved, but maybe not necessarily the lead. They bring in other villains like Brainiac. Yeah. In Lois and Clark, it was Dana Carvey with a big giant bald head, veiny like he has a brain. It was, again, they missed the mark on a lot of these things. Intergang, organized crime in Metropolis, allows for people to continuously come after Superman and continuously put him in the position to have to make decisions. It's the old trope of, are you going to save Lois, or are you going to save this bus of kids? Are you going to save Jimmy, or are you going to save Lois? Like, Intergang allows this constant stream of Superman in peril in that decision space of save the world, save my friend, save my family, save the world, save this thing, save that thing. And that allows us to continue for the Superman story to be intriguing when Superman can be much more global. He doesn't have to be trying to pass off as a human in a city like Metropolis.
Absolutely. And that's been the story for forever, right? How do we make the stakes high for Superman? Well, it's because he has these connections. He has friends and he has family that are the most important to him. When we see that taken away, and this, we didn't mention this in our notes, but it seems like a good time to mention it. When that's taken away, when we get a Superman whose, parents have already died of natural causes, and the Joker explodes Lois Lane and she dies and Superman has nothing to lose, that's when we get the Injustice story. That's when Superman just explodes out and takes over the world.
I actually have Injustice on my
my
list, but you are right. This is a good time to bring it up anyways, because there are two prongs to the continuing story, down the continuum of Superman from its origin story. Because you could really just end with he continues to live his life, and we don't know if he ages at typical age or if he's going to outlive Lois Lane at some point. That's an inevitability. They had kids, so you have the Lois and Clark's children, or child, depending on which era you're looking at. And then you have Superman's life after Lois Lane. So Injustice is definitely one of them, but Intergang would allow that story to continue. Superman could potentially become the leader of Intergang if he decided to. That villain is always present.
I would say, just kind of bringing it back around to that as well, I mentioned that Action Comics 1000 was the ushering in Brian Michael Bendis on Superman. That first Brian Michael Bendis story that he did was an Intergang story. And that arc, if you're looking for something to read with Intergang to kind of see what that's all about in a very modern and well-written, written for a modern audience context, I would check out his run on Superman.
What's the most entertaining Superman for you?
This is tough. Certainly some of the things that I've mentioned before, I mention them because they're all bangers. They're all winners. All-Star Superman, I've read a few times because I find it really entertaining. The animated stuff, Justice League Unlimited is a great Superman. But I want to talk about something new. So I'm going to go with an animated movie it's an animated movie that's a retelling of the arc in the comics, but it's called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And this story is kind of a pushback or an answer or a reset to the gritty, dark comics of the 90s. In the 90s, comic books really took a turn to, let's crank this up to 11 and it'll be extreme. We saw Image Comics branch out. A bunch of writers from Marvel and DC formed Image Comics, which was their own creator-owned studio, where we got things like Spawn and these independent 90s comics where everybody had tons of muscles and lots of spikes, and they were anti-heroes. It wasn't always doing good. It was sometimes you got to get your hands dirty to solve the problem kind of characters. And that spawned out into our television shows and things like The Max and Eon Flux on MTV, all of that kind of gritty, violent comics. And during that time, it really seemed like there was no place for Superman. And the mainstream Superman stories didn't exactly know what to do with themselves. That's when we get the death of Superman, right? That was a huge event when we were in high school, was, the black cover and everybody going crazy about buying that issue. And it wasn't Darkseid, it was Doomsday, just this huge monster full of spikes, just bashing his head into a bloody pulp and the sidewalk and those kinds of things. And then when they rebooted after that and kind of brought him back, he came back in these weird areas. They didn't know what they were doing with him. There was like a blue Superman and a red Superman, and they had mullets, and it was just a mess. And then somebody finally came along and was like, okay, we don't have to play catch up with what's going on with everybody else. Superman is Superman because of who he is, because of the values, because of the idea of trying to fit in and do your best against obstacles. Even now, the meta of, well, everybody else is doing all of these violent, high octane, weird things, but Superman wouldn't do that. Superman would stick to what his truth is and take care of the people that he loves and protect people in the city, even if that means sacrificing himself. Those kinds of things reset. So in this story, you see a crew of villains who pass themselves off as heroes because they can get the job done. And there's a lot more collateral damage, but they can market themselves. They're kind of cool and punky. And part of their thing is that they are doing a smear campaign on Superman. Hey, look what we got done. Superman could never do that. And Superman's like, well, yeah, because if I took the clean water from that place, that means those people are now having a drought in this other country. And you're not but that's not what the media sees, right? This is very like media friendly kind of group. So it's Superman's struggle of other people getting all of this attention because they're doing the heroics in the wrong way. And Superman has to kind of stick to his truth. And of course, at the end, it's revealed to the public. They all, instead of like, oh, yeah, Superman never helped us like that, blah, blah, blah. Of course, in a very stirring and tear-welling ending, everybody kind of comes back, right? So that's a great Superman story that's not, go back and read a bunch of old stuff. You can watch it in a movie form, and it's a great story for Superman at that core.
On mine for most entertaining, and it's really because it's just what I'm watching right now. I am entertained by it. I was really intrigued by the idea of Lois and Clark having kids. And I know you and I had a conversation about this off the podcast, that the typical storyline here is that there's a single child that they have, a son.
Right.
And that's Jonathan Kent, right? In the television series Superman and Lois that came out, is now on, I think it's on HBO Max. It gave Clark and Lois twin boys. It puts the story in modern right now. You and I are both educators. I've been at the high school level for 23 years. It puts two teenage boys at the high school level. Lois and Clark, after the death of Martha Kent, move back to Smallville to take care of the farm and get their boys out of Metropolis and kind of give them, Clark has the way I grew up, more simple kind of life. Very intriguing to see this parallel path of these two boys, one who's starting to emerge with powers and one who is not. And it's not the typical jock, I can do everything kid that gets the powers. It's the emo, I don't want to go to school. I want to play video games all day. I don't care what you have to say. Stay in my room, close the door. And the struggles of him as a father, as Superman, and trying to help manage these two teenage boys and what's going on. It's pretty well written. It's trying too hard to create villainy. So it's, they've created some exterior characters that maybe aren't in the typical Superman trope lore, whatever, so that they have more interesting things to do. I don't see Smallville as being as dark and dangerous as they're making it seem, but everything we know now in television and shows is being made darker. So that's a thing, but it's entertaining. I'm not totally sold on the guy that plays Superman. He seems a little too much on the mild-mannered side, so that when he is Superman, it's not as believable, but the storytelling and with the twin sons, I think, is really interesting. Say Lois Lane being this all-powerful, prize-winning reporter suddenly working for a two-person Smallville Gazette with having to basically start all over and struggling with that because she's used to being Lois Lane when she walks into a room. So they have some interesting things putting in a very modern time with cell phones and little technologies like they have a little buzzer if they're in danger that pings Superman's hearing. And, they do some modern things like that I think is pretty entertaining.
Superman's greatest challenge yet, parenting teenagers. Yeah, I haven't checked that out. It's interesting. That was going to be one of my questions as you were talking about it, because that actor who plays Superman in that show, that's a spinoff from Supergirl, where he showed up, purposefully very sparsely, right? Because Supergirl is not about Superman coming to save the day. It's about her doing her own thing. But every once in a while, of course, Superman has to be there to remind the audience that, hey, she's Superman's cousin. So he would show up and just it came across to me as very stiff and nothing that I necessarily wanted to see more of. And I didn't know if that was maybe on purpose, but then they gave him his own show. So it's like, well, I guess they like him good enough.
What's really funny is this show was out and popular when I was working on my doctorate. When I was working on my doctorate, I worked for the marching band at the university, make some extra money, continue in the band world, so on and so forth. And the main director, hello to Jason Stumbo if you are listening, he dressed as Superman one Halloween, and his wife had said, oh, the guy in the new series for Superman looks just like him, so I convinced him to wear this for Halloween, blah, blah. Had no idea what she was talking about and buried that deep in my brain somewhere. So I turned it on to watch the series in preparation for this episode, and he comes across the screen. I said, oh my goodness. And that memory pinged into my head. I don't know if I can take him seriously because he looks just like the gentleman I worked with at the University of Toledo. I'll show you a picture and maybe I'll put it up on our podcast. This guy looks just like him, talks like him, like facial expressions are like him. It's really eerie. And I might have a block in my brain, but he doesn't come across as strong Superman like we're used to seeing, right? Dean Cain, not a great actor. There's a lot of hand
not a great
like
guy.
This. I mean, we can, that's Google that if you are not aware, listener. But it's a lot of like, I'm Superman and I have this flat open palm gesture and and then he has the same gesture when he's Clark Kent. Well, we have this story and I'm like, there's no depth. I liked the show at the time for whatever reasons, but it was really hard to stomach a more recent watching of it. But he did play a good Superman. When Dean Cain was in it as Superman, he portrayed the still vulnerable but strong, I can do these things, I can do good for the world that Christopher Reeves was also able to portray. He just wasn't able to distinguish Clark Kent as much. But the gentleman that plays in Superman and Lois, little hard to really take him seriously, but they do a really good job with the story of the teenagers. The two young men that play the twin boys do a really good job of struggling as a current high school student. And that's what's most entertaining about it to me, is that they didn't fluff what the high school experience is for kids now, right? Okay. The powers start coming about because the one son is being bullied and he's getting the crap beat out of him, and out of anger, the beams shoot out of his eyes and injure someone, fly out of his eyes, and it explodes the bonfire that they're at, and a bunch of people get hurt. When Clark sees the cell phone footage, because kids with cell phones are videotaping, yeah, or old. Kids with the cell phones are recording themselves like, yeah, we're at the bonfire, woo. And he sees the footage. He knows exactly what it is. And he takes them and starts talking to them. And he comes out to them as Superman. And there's a whole, I hate you. I can't believe you lied to us all this time. And it's really realistic. They do a really good job with the storytelling.
So would recommend.
It's entertaining if you're interested, and if you're geekily interested in what the experience would be like now, right? That's what I love about the Buffy comics that you introduced me to like 2 years ago now, that they take the Buffy origin story and place her in current high school, because you can watch a show and go, man, this would have been so much better if she could just pick up the phone and say, Willow, don't go, it's a trap. right? Or kids won't pick up the phone these days. We're old. Text Willow and say they're going to snap Willow. Willow, don't go. It's a trap. I like that component of it. The struggling of finding out about powers, being a teenager, being bullied, social media, and all of those things. Recommended for those pieces, yes.
So the next category we have is best or favorite sidekicks. Superman's got a lot of sidekicks. He's got Jimmy Olsen. He's got Perry White at the newspaper. He's got sometimes Crypto the Super Dog would rank up there with a good sidekick. But I'm going to go a little bit astray, and I'm going to say my favorite my favorite Superman sidekick is Batman. When Batman and Superman team up, which happens all the time, because if you want to get comics sold, you got to put Batman in there. Batman, it's the same thing in Marvel Comics with Spider-Man. Spider-Man, it shows up in everybody else's book because Spider-Man sells copies. It's the same thing with Batman. Everything's better with Batman, including your Superman comics. So I'm going to back this up by recommending Superman Batman title from 2004, written by Jeff Loeb. It is super cool. Superman and Batman are teamed up and they have these different adventures. It kind of takes turns fighting through bad guys in each other's rogue galleries. They have to go to another planet and they do all kinds of stuff. The turning point where I think it gets really good is when Kara Zor-El Supergirl shows up and crash lands on Earth, and they're dealing with that. And of course, Batman is worried about this being a danger to the planet and we have to destroy this threat. And Superman's like, it's family. Let's, this is my cousin. This is great. And so they have that kind of always at odds, but have to work together kind of thing going throughout that whole book. It has been criticized, as I understand it, for the art. The art is of a style that pretty cheesecakey as far as, all the dude characters are big and muscly and square jaw, and all the lady characters are, super tiny waist and big chest.
Yes.
So there is a criticism there, but I still have a nice place in my heart for Superman and Batman, that whole run. There's also a really cool part of it where they fight this team of bad guys and they are analogs for the Avengers. So there's a big gray strong alien that is totally the Hulk, and there's this other dude with a shield that's totally Captain America, and it's very entertaining to see that whole story arc work out where it's Superman and Batman versus the quotes Avengers team.
I want to give a shout out to something that I thought was really clever in the 90s with Lois and Clark and the Val Kilmer Batman movie. So Lois and Clark was at its high point, maybe the second season or third season where it was most popular. Batman Forever, I think. Whichever that movie was, it came out at some point. In the movie, there is a mention of Superman and Metropolis. And I can't remember what it is. He's probably halfway. He's probably halfway to Metropolis by now. And it's just a little ping to Superman. And in the season premiere of Lois and Clark, right after that movie came out, end of the season before, Lois had found out that Clark Kent was Superman. And they start the season at odds because she's mad at him that he didn't say anything to her, and they're arguing in a parking lot, and she goes, I can't believe you didn't tell me you were Superman, something along those lines. And he says, Lois, I don't think they heard you in Gotham City. Say it a little bit louder, right? I thought that was a cute little nod to each other between Batman and Superman. I put for best sidekick Supergirl, because one thing that the Superman story is very void of is female characters other than Martha Kent and Lois Lane. Lois Lane could be considered a sidekick somewhat, but depending on how she is portrayed in the different versions of Superman, can either be really great, really strong female character, or just really annoying, stereotypical woman. Martha Kent, again, can be portrayed as she's a mom, she's his nurture spot, and as a sometimes strong, I'm going to sew your costume and you're going to be Superman and I'm going to make sure you're okay because you're my son. There's never continuity. But Supergirl is Supergirl. She's got superpowers. Eventually has the same ideals as Superman, but in a female form. I chose Supergirl.
Okay. Have you seen the Supergirl show?
That is on my list. I tried to get through Superman and Lois to watch that next, but I've heard it is very good.
I love it. I think it's extremely charming. It's just adorable. What's cool about that show is that it leans into the Supergirl storylines that have to do with the Legion of Superheroes.
Okay.
The Legion of Superheroes is really where I think a lot of the Supergirl comics live, as far as the Legion of Superheroes is the far, far future. I forget what year it is, 3023 or something like that, and it's the team of superheroes that base themselves after the historical values of Superman and the Justice League of the far, far past. And I think Supergirl operates a lot in that because of time travel shenanigans. I think we would see Superboy and Supergirl side kicking it up a little bit more often, with Lightning Lad and Brainiac 5 and Shadow Girl and that whole cast of characters. The TV show leans into that, which I think is pretty cool.
I will say, just looking at it from the outside, not having seen that, I'm annoyed that it is Superman and Supergirl, but I guess Superwoman would not have sounded as good. I'm just going to say the little feminist in me says, why isn't it Superwoman? Why is it going to be Supergirl? But never mind.
I think it's because that's a 3-syllable or a 4-syllable word instead of a 3-syllable word. And I think that's all there is to it. Yeah. But there is also the idea of a lot of the portrayals of Supergirl is she is a little bit more girlish. There's a weird thing that happened when they do the retcon of Supergirl in the first place. Supergirl came first, but her route to Earth was planned at the regular speed it was supposed to be or whatever. And she's actually Clark's older cousin. But Clark was launched, his little capsule launched at the time of the explosion of the planet. So he actually shot to Earth much faster than she did. So he's grown up by the time she arrives from her suspended animation. Right. Where on Earth, she remembers him as, oh, little Clark. Now he's older than she is. Right. And she's the Supergirl. There's a weird,
Yeah, it's interesting. I just, the little feminist in me, where you mentioned, gets tired of seeing the small-waisted, big-breasted, very empty female characters. There's a lot of that in early things. And when you have a superhero origin from 1938, certainly there's a lot of that. But I will say Batman moved a bit quicker in terms of redeemable female characters than Superman did. But I think part of that is also because Batman is human. Bruce Wayne runs into powerful women more often than Superman does. It's problematic. We know it's problematic in comics, and comic books and companies are doing a much better job of that now with bringing out Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel, and there's a lot more representation now than there was even just 20 years ago. So,
and keep in mind too that when Supergirl was popular in those Legion of Superheroes comic books, the Legion of Superheroes comic books started as like a romance comic. It was a group of teenagers and their high school love triangle drama. So being a girl was very much like everybody was boy and lad and girl and lass. Right. Yeah. When society evolves, our entertainment evolves as well. So that was just my foot stomping. I'm going to say a girl is his best sidekick. I see.
We have your favorite written version.
This is tough because there's been so many cool stories, and certainly the All-Star Superman book that I recommended earlier is really top of well-written superhero stories that I would recommend. But again, to point out something new that is also equally as good and entertaining would be 2017's Super Sons by Peter Tomasi. I love Super Sons. Super Sons, I feel like, was written for me at exactly the right time. Super Sons is that story of Superman with his son Jonathan, who's like junior high age, kind of a tween. And then there's also Batman and Damian Wayne, his son, who is also a tween. It's very much the story of Jonathan and Damian and their kind of adventures and the troubles that they get into, and their very different personalities. Jonathan is much more like his father as far as he's polite, he follows the rules, he wants to do the right thing, where Damian also wants to do the right thing, but he wants to do it by like beating people up and sneaking around and getting away with stuff and those kinds of things. So their friendship is really cool to watch. And then, of course, the parenting styles of Lois and Clark versus Bruce Wayne, the conversations that the two dads have sometimes, and the different struggles they're going through with very different personalities, but really there are some fundamental similarities, that kind of thing. in 2017. Let's see, that would have been 4 years ago. My own son was 10, 9, 10. And this book came out and just punched me right in the heart. I absolutely love it and definitely recommend, like, if you're a dad, if you're a mom, if you're, an educator that works with kids and you want to just have that superhero stuff that with two of the most popular superheroes, Superman and Batman, and just inject some youth into it and some relationship stuff. Absolutely love Super Sons. It definitely was a precursor to that Superman and Lois show that you're in.
Oh, sure. Interesting that they made it twins for the show. They create more internal conflict for Superman.
It sounds like one of the twins is like
Damian,
the dark emo Damian Wayne, and they just decided to like not put Batman in it for whatever weird contracting reasons they have.
Oh, and they might have still. I did not finish the series. I only got a handful, maybe most of the first season in, so I don't know actually where it goes. I kind of cheated on favorite written version because I'm going with the video game Injustice, but in particular the comic book that accompanies it.
Injustice comics are insanely good.
Yes.
Like, you would not believe it. You'd be like, oh, it's a video game property. They turned it into the comic book. That sounds like nothing anybody wants to read.
Exactly.
It's awesome.
It's mind-blowing how good it is, how many different characters they incorporate, and how that goes and ties in with the video game. So I think we hinted on this story in the past, Rob, and you stopped us from telling it because you're like, we're doing a Superman episode. We were introduced to Injustice on my 35th birthday when the video game was relatively new. So when I turned 35, I was living in Las Vegas at the time. We decided to invite everybody over from California and have a nice little birthday bash / that was the first Good Ice tour. Or maybe that was the second one. I think the first one was just you and me. So this birthday party was because we made shirts that said Good Ice Tour Part 2.
And this was obviously the second one. There was more people, yeah.
Exactly. And there was more people. So we got timeshare. We all hung out. We did the Good Ice stuff. At the time in Vegas, there was a barcade that was relatively new. So I called them up and I said, hey, I'm a local. This is what's going on. I'm having a bunch of my friends come over. They gave us a really great deal. And we got a private booth with
the bottle service. We did the Vegas bottle service private booth thing at this place. It was so fun.
What was great was we had like circular booth with the bottle service in the middle and then 2 big screens. And we had our choice of 2 consoles. And they had a bunch to choose from, and you can change them out for the like 3 hours or 4 hours we had that booth. I can't remember how long we had the booth. The bar was hopping. I don't, as I think back to those memories, we were just to our group. But I remember looking up a few times and the dance floor was packed and all of their arcade area was packed and the bar area was packed. And we were just having a good old time and it was loud and fun. And you had said, oh, get an Xbox because they have the game Injustice. And everyone else was like, Injustice? What are you talking about? And you're like, it's supposed to be really good and it's all superhero based. So let's get it. And we basically played that the rest of the night. Like, we broke glassware jumping up and down.
We were having watching so much fun
watching this thing. The game is so good. We were just
passing the controller around like, oh, you lose, you pass your controller off to the next person and you face the champion and stuff. We were so into it and the alcohol was flowing and the music is just oosh, 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 and the lights and everything. And we're just playing. And there were some times, like, as we were starting to get good and stuff, they would take the feed from the different people playing video games and then put it up on the big, like the TVs that were around the bar or the big like wall projector and all this stuff. There was just nothing cooler than being in these intense games of fighting, Robin versus Aquaman or whatever in this like Mortal Kombat style game, and then like look up and see the same thing, just yards and yards of it all over, so that everybody's seeing you play and all this kind of stuff. And
people were cheering and screaming and yelling, and
because that game was new. When you saw like the ultimates in that game for the first time, they were shockingly awesome.
And I'm just such a fun. Even now, is such a fun video game, and it's ridiculous once you see. I call it their specials, ultimates, whatever they're called, like their signature moves that got all animated and blown out of the little fight scene. And then Superman punches someone into space and then flies up and grabs him and then brings him and slams him back down to full speed. And just all of that stuff was amazing. And seeing on the big screen, people cheering. And then people like who were gaming geeks heard, like, we had the one copy the barcade had. Really? So I don't know if you remember this, but they'd come up and like, that's that Injustice game. We're like, yep. And how is it? Oh my God. Like, I remember people coming up and watching our screen when it wasn't on the big thing. And then once the bar saw that is when they started putting up on the big screens around the bar. And I remember seeing people just, oh my God, like going crazy over it and like looking around to see who was playing it. Like, oh my gosh, Injustice is so good. And now both of us get our asses beat all the time by your son Andrew. So
That's right. We've got Injustice 2, and he loves to break that out when we're hanging out and just whoop us.
and that one has
Still
the
fun, though.
Ninja Turtles. Talk about Injustice 2 with the Ninja Turtle additional character. So much fun.
The Ninja Turtles are awesome. Hellboy is in there. I think there's some other kind of outside the DC mainstream characters that they've put in there since then. And yeah, it's really fun. Written, the comic book that was based on that absolutely eclipses what you get in the video game. The video game's got a good story, and we talked about that earlier, right? The Joker kills Lois, and Superman has nothing left to live for except his anger and revenge, and he decides he's just going to take over the planet and set it the way it's supposed to be, and Batman leads an uprising of other superheroes, and lines are drawn and sides are taken. And the comic really explores all of the little cutscenes you might get in the video game into their own issue, and moves away from just Superman and Batman to some of the other. You get a lot of Harley Quinn, Shazam, and Black Manta, and like all of these different characters that are in the game. You get to see from their perspectives and their stories, and how they're dealing with that split.
And how their characters would react to what's going on and lend a hand or not lend a hand or whatever it is they're going to do to react to the storyline. It is what I would consider like a final chapter of Superman kind of deal, and just really well written.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it. Is like, if you ever thought like, well, how does the Superman story end? This is a good one.
It would be realistic, right? He's going to outlive Lois Lane. He has nothing to live for, and that is a realistic version. What if he can't save them, just like he couldn't save his father, right? Yeah. So, I love it. I love it.
Our final category is movie, and I noticed that your side is blank. We did talk. Go ahead.
I don't have a favorite Superman movie.
They're not very good.
I will say I saw a scene recently on Reels, on Instagram, on something, a fun little scene in one of the Injustice movies. In one of the Justice League movies, or the most recent one, where the Flash and Superman are going to have a race. So that looked really cool and a fun little thing, but it's not the movie itself. And false hope, having not seen it, that the rest of the movie looks as cool as that did. Also, I have a friend who works CGI on those films, and so I can appreciate the work he did in making the capes and their hair look realistic as they're doing this slow motion race between the Flash and Superman. I don't have a favorite movie. I almost took that category out before you filled it in. So
we have a lot of like good feelings about the original Christopher Reeve Superman movies, but that's because Christopher Reeves was who he was, and he had such a tragic story of becoming paralyzed, and what cool outreach and stuff that he did with his influence. Like, Christopher Reeves is the reason we love those movies. They don't hold up. Like, I can't sit through them now. The pacing is bad. It's cheesy. Like, they're just not very good. I am going to propose that the greatest Superman movie is, in fact, The Iron Giant.
Wait, what?
The Iron Giant, as we talked about a few episodes ago, as one of my favorite 90s movies. The reason why it's one of my favorite 90s movies is because it is Superman. The Iron Giant crashes to Earth. He's trying to fit in. He's raised, by this kid that finds him out in the forest. The rest of the world thinks he's a threat and wants to destroy him, but he learns literally from Superman comics what it means to be a powerful person in a world full of people that want to destroy you but are so much weaker and flimsier than you. And he figures out that while he can be a weapon, what he wants to be is a savior. And at the end of that movie, the part where he goes flying up in the air to save the kid while he's being riddled with bullets, and just, in his, who is it? Vin Diesel does the voice. It just,
that's right.
Superman, and just explodes. It makes me cry. It is the best Superman movie ever made, The Iron Giant.
I think that's fair. And the fact that Superman is the source material for the Iron Giant, I think that tracks.
And
I'm
it's so
down with
brilliant
that.
because they literally put it in the movie. So it's not, you know what I mean? Like, it would be one thing to be like, you know, you could look back and be like, oh, that's kind of a Superman ripoff. But the way that they like inject it in, it's a love letter. It makes it a love letter to Superman rather than just, oh, we'll make Superman a giant robot. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just brilliant.
It's a different skin of the same story and then uses it as inspiration. I think I think that's a good call.
We did it.
That's
That
Superman.
is Superman.
That is super, man. What's the nerdiest thing you did this week, Rob?
All right, the nerdiest thing that I have been working on, and I was trying to think because a lot of times my routine is kind of the same, just full of nerdy stuff. So I was asking my family, like, what have I been working on that you think is kind of nerdy? And they're like, well, you're obsessed right now with your Hero Quest game board. And I think I've mentioned that a little bit before, but I'm about 2/5 done with my Hero Quest game board, 3D printing and painting that all up. It's all colorful and fun and big. And
man, look at that.
If you like shake it, I don't know if that comes across on the microphone, but it rattles because it's full of magnets, right? All the walls that go on are all, you know, magnetized and all that kind of stuff. And as it's getting bigger, I had to find a way to organize it. And I've talked about before my love for really useful boxes and the way that they are square, they don't taper, they stack really well, all of that kind of thing. So you're going to love this. I brought it as a visual aid. This is my really useful box.
Full of really useful boxes.
Really useful boxes.
I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh.
Is labeled with which room of walls that it goes to, so that when I set up and tear down, I can go like, oh, here's C1 and look for C1 on the thing and know which walls go to which room. And so small, really useful boxes inside a larger, really useful box.
And that tracks last episode or the episode before, you talked about getting the little, really useful boxes and the holder for those to put all the little pieces in, all the little minis and whatnot.
I also have that right here,
which
is the holder. And you can see that those are all labeled. So what I've done here is I've got 2 of these sets, one for each of the in-person D&D campaigns that we're doing. So this is the one for Princes of the Apocalypse. I've got it all set out. Like you want to work ahead so you don't get caught with a mini you need but don't have, or one that's not painted and kind of stuff. So you look ahead and you make your big list of all the different minis you're going to need for the campaign. But then what do? Do I like go try to find and scramble for them? You know, oh, what room are they going to go into this week? I got to make sure that I have it. Not anymore. Now all of those minis are categorized, they're organized, they're labeled in this box. And I just take that little box holder with me to the game. So wherever they go, I can easily grab that little box, toss the miniatures out on the map.
Is your intention to then keep updating that box pending on the games you're playing, or is that box forever going to be that campaign?
Nope. When we're done with that campaign, I'll rip the labels off and do the same thing for the next.
Amazing. So, Rob, I am so excited because Final Girl Series 1 came in yesterday. I am so excited for this game.
Listeners, she was tracking this game across the United States, like obsessively watching, was it FedEx or UPS?
It was
tracking,
FedEx.
And like, my game is in Topeka. My game is in Arizona. My game is in some California place.
Everyone does this, and I only checked once a day. I just happened to screenshot and message you when I checked it. I know you've done that before. No, so we're late to the Final Girl game. Final Girl, I think this is something you've mentioned. 2020 pandemic happens. Solo gaming goes on the rise. So a lot more companies came out with solo games. So in 2021, Final Girl was created, and the premise of this is you are the final girl in a horror movie type setting or a horror story type setting. The final girl, like your Nev Campbell in Scream, like your Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween. Those are your ultimate final girls. So the game is a solo play. They compare it to solitaire because there's a lot of cards, but you basically have a little board. You have the bad guy, the murder guy, the villain, and you have the final girl, and you have to try to navigate the little board and area and try to save people or they get killed. And it comes down to a final battle, the final girl against the villain, and it's kill or be killed. So it's just like a horror movie. And it is a series of them. So the first series was really popular. It won a bunch of awards, the Golden Geek Award. It won a bunch of gaming awards. It promotes itself as the highest backed Kickstarter for solo gaming ever, and it was really, really popular. I knew nothing about it. You, as my best friend, as you constantly do, bring things to my attention that you know I like, and I love you for that because I can't believe this game went by and I didn't notice. So luckily, at the time you noticed it, the company Ryder Games was coming out with Series 2. I say Season 2 because to me it feels like that, but Series 2. And in Series 2, you could go all in and get all of Series 1 as well. So I pulled from my buckets and went all in, and I chose 2 waves shipping. So Series 1, which had already been printed and already finalized, all they had to do was reprint and send out in the first wave if you wanted. I chose that option. It was supposed to come in July because I've talked about it on the podcast before and wanting the summer to paint the minis and stuff. It came in delayed, which is fine, delayed a few months, and it came in. We're recording this at the end of October. I opened the box yesterday. It is gorgeous. It is such a gorgeous game. Opened each of the boxes, took all the plastic wrapping off, kind of took a look at one of the boards, opened it up, showed my partner because I was trying to explain to my partner how this game works. But we took out the play mats, and it comes with neoprene mats. It's not, They're not huge ones. They fit in a little box, and I'll show you in a second. But the artwork is phenomenal. I'm going to show you the cover.
Oh, it's bigger in real life than I thought it was from the picture.
Yeah. It is huge.
Oh my gosh, it's real thick too.
They do not
it's like
fit in my bookshelves.
18 by 18, and then it's, God, what is that? 6 inches tall? Maybe more. It's huge.
It's more. Whatever the Calyx box dimensions is, when you put this on the side, this takes half of a Calyx box. Crazy. The artwork is just amazing. I want to show you one other thing, and I'll put some pictures up. Again, listeners, this is not a new game. You'll hear a lot more about Final Girl and awards that the second series is going to win when the second series comes out somewhere about February or March. This first series, so they make the box that holds the neoprene board look like a VHS player, and then each of the little vignettes or the stories or each game is like a VHS tape. It uses magnetic as well. When you pull out a story to play, you choose one of the final girls, and then it's all magnetic. So you pull this piece off. Yeah. This is the game board.
Oh, look at that.
So you put this on the neoprene mat for the setting that you're going to play. And then inside are the villain cards. You take off the other side of the box, and you have the villain. I might play this game before I paint the minis because I'm so excited to play it.
And you should get excited about painting your minis. Weather's nice. You can go play them.
I am excited about painting the minis, but I want to play the game.
Just paint them as you go. What's the first one? You need a final girl and probably a bad guy. Paint those 2 up, play, but then do the next 2, play.
Maybe, but I'm not good with waiting. I'm a child when it comes to this stuff, but so I'm excited. I have the all in. So they reprinted all the bonuses from the initial Kickstarter. So I have all the little bonuses, and the minis are bonuses, and they're very intricate and they're a little intimidating. I mentioned to you yesterday, but I'm excited. I was looking through the cards. I nerded out about that hardcore yesterday. Even though we went to a big sale at our local comic book store, we both could have said that was the nerdiest thing we did.
Let's save that for next time. Very visual nerdiest things this week. So I'll get you some pictures of my work in progress.
Oh yeah.
Some pictures of Final Girl, and we'll coordinate those Instagram posts and those Facebook posts when this episode comes out. So if you want to see what we're talking about, definitely jump over there, and definitely give us a follow while you're over there checking out those pictures as well. Next episode, Oh, baby. I've been waiting for this one ever since it was even suggested that I would have to sit through all of those Buffy episodes. That's not true. When it was suggested, I was actually looking forward to it. It was after I watched all those Buffy episodes that I was disappointed. I said, we have to watch Firefly, another Joss Whedon production. That is what we will be covering. You've got 2 weeks to watch 14 episodes and a movie. If you want to catch up and have it fresh in your mind along with us, I'm also excited because we're going to have guests for this next episode, bringing in some Firefly experts from our different walks of life to talk about this great show, this great movie, and I'm very excited about it.
Remember to subscribe, share, and give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at NerdBestFriends, or send us a message by writing to podcast@nerdbestfriends.com. Always a super good time with you, Rob.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everybody. Up, up, and away. What's not to love about Superman?
Well, according to you and the DC movie franchise, a lot. But more on that later. But first, Rob's recommendations. I'll do it again. Hold on.
Burn, Zack Snyder.
Blah, 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 blah.
Rather than making it super superficial, really.
I was going to say something and it blanked on what I was going to say about that.